Hey guys! Because I get asked a lot about painting fur with watercolor, I'm going to explain a couple of techniques I use for painting fur using two different styles while demonstrating those techniques on this realistic brown calf painting. Before we jump in, hit that subscribe button if you're new here and turn on notifications so you never miss any new tutorials like this. Let's paint this cow. Sometimes when painting something realistically like this animal portrait, you may want to add a variety of watercolor techniques to your painting to make it more interesting. If you're not careful, an animal portrait can look messy and overworked, especially if you try to paint every single little strand of fur. So something I like to do in portions of the painting that are maybe less in focus is to paint the fur to look soft and blended using wet washes of color and blooms. With this first method of painting soft, out-of-focus fur, I start with the wet and wet technique, painting the calf inside of my drawing with water first, then going in with a light base wash of burnt sienna. Even in this beginning stage, I use more paint in areas that will be darker and more water in areas that are in the light. Use this opportunity while your surface is wet to drop in hints of yellow or any other colors you want to look completely blended in this first layer. I've decided I want this cow's neck and body in the left side of the painting to have that soft, diffused, blended, wet and wet look. It's also in shadow, so I'm going to need to go very dark with it. I wet the paper again, and then I need to make sure I mix up enough paint so that when I drop in those shadow colors, I don't have to take the time to stop and mix more. I'm mixing indigo and burnt umber to create that dark color. Because the paper is very wet, as I start to paint in those shadows, the paint is blooming all over. It almost looks like an explosion of fur. If you're enjoying this video and would like to try this cow painting for yourself, click on the link in the description to access the full-length, narrated, real-time version of this tutorial, which also comes with my reference photo and sketch. And while you're there, you can download my free watercolor jumpstart guide. You can add some burnt sienna, which is a reddish brown. And if you want your shadow to look cooler, go heavier with blue in your paint mixture. For the most part, I want the paint over here to just soften and blend. I'm not going to go super detailed here because it's not the focal point. It's amazing how the paint and paper can work for you to make it look really fuzzy. Where the paper is dry on the back of the neck, I'm just lightly brushing on some more defined fur shapes. To add blooms for more of a special watercolor effect, just add drops of water to your wet paint. I'm doing a couple of big blooms here while the paint is still wet. When painting an animal portrait, often the focal point of the painting is the eyes. To help draw your viewer's eye to the focal point, you can go more detailed with your fur texture. I generally try to accomplish this by using the wet on dry technique, which is when you apply wet paint on dry or almost dry paper. For a detailed fur texture, I use a much smaller brush than I would use for the soft wet and wet technique. In order for this to look good, make sure you have a good base layer of color. I just use a very quick swiping motion to pull that wet paint in towards the center of the head. I allow my brush to miss some areas, which creates highlights between the brush strokes. There's a starburst shape in the center of the head in the cowlick, so I'm allowing my brush strokes to match that shape. Take your time with this part of the painting. As you add these details, it can sometimes feel like it's taking forever, but it will be worth the extra effort. Pay careful attention to the colors you see in the fur. Don't just stick with one color all over. Mixing it up with a variety of colors and values will add depth to the painting. As fur enters shadow, be sure to observe this and darken your paint application accordingly. On the top of the head, I'm using a rich reddish brown and very lightly and quickly suggesting that curly fur on the top of the head while avoiding highlights, and then doing a scrubbing motion to create a soft, fuzzy effect. Whenever possible, try to use the texture of the paper to your advantage too. Sometimes you can add fur texture just by scraping your brush across the surface of the paper. Add more washes of color when you need to go darker with broad surfaces of fur. If the layer beneath has dried already, you won't lose those details that you already painted. Always paint the fur in the direction the fur is growing, and avoid doing this detail work all over the head. Choose areas that are inside the focal point and strive for variety and balance in your textures. If you try some of these techniques on your own animal paintings, let me know how it goes. I love it when you share your work with me. Just tag me on Instagram, leave me a comment below, and please, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Check out these other videos on painting animal fur, and I'll see you in the next one.